Let's try again. Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here to present to you our vision on the interconnected city, how to live in future cities. Can we start the presentation? Perfect. So cities, chances are that if you are watching this, you live in a city, because the majority of the global population lives in cities today. But if you want to keep doing that or do that in a healthy and safe way, while not making a negative impact on other places elsewhere, we need to reimagine the way we live our urban lives. And I'll tell you why. So cities only occupy 3% of the global land surface, so that's very little, but they consume 75% of all global resources and produce 60 to 80% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, making them giant leverage points. We are currently fueling our cities through an extractive economy in which we take lots of resources, make them into products, and then dispose them when we're done with them. To illustrate, we take these raw materials from mines somewhere else to build our products and electronics. We feed our populations through these large monocultures that require lots of pesticides to keep going. And we need lots of land and forests to supply our buildings. Once we have these raw materials, we manufacture them into products that we ship all over the world until they come into our urban stores when we can purchase them and use them and consume them. And then sometimes we build these products that we cannot take apart anymore. You might recognize these as Apple AirPods. And then if we can't take them apart anymore, we get rid of them, we dispose them. And some of these materials end up in other places. So cities far extend their footprints. We take lots of resources, we make them into products, and then once we're done, we dispose them. And this is having a negative impact on the rest of the planet. It's causing global warming or climate change, extreme weather events, but also wildfires. You might have seen these pictures before of desertification, the soils that we cannot use anymore for farming, toxic environments, but also big heaps of plastics and flood events. And then think about air pollution. So the resources we use in cities, but also the negative impact associated with that, is not distributed equally. It is often already vulnerable populations or other ecosystems and species that are suffering the consequences first. And our cities are growing. So what you see here is a map of all the mega cities in the world. So these are the gray letters. And then if you see the red names, those are the mega cities that are projected to evolve over the next 8 years. So we are only going to need more resources and energy. So it is time to reimagine how we live in our cities and how we consume our resources. How might cities grow without crossing the boundaries of the planet and making a negative impact, while still having enough resources and being able to divide them or distribute them in an equitable and just way amongst all our inhabitants so that we all have enough? What does that sustainable future look like? And here is where I would really like to hear from you. So if you think about the city of the future, what is most important to you? So think about where you want to live in 2015. I would very much like to invite you to share your ideas with us, because we need to build that future together. We need to put a dot on the horizon, think about how we want to live, and then we can work together to achieve that. So either share that in the chat if you can, or share that using this hashtag, #MyFutureCity. You can tag us in it because we'd love to have a conversation with you. So we've also done some thinking about that city of the future. And for us at Metabolic, it is important that we connect more to our planet and to other species. Can we bring the nature back in the cities? Can we have green buildings with green facades where other animals and species and insects can live? Can we have more different flowers in the cities or plants? Can we make sure that we don't only have cars, but bring back nature in our streets? And can we have healthy soils so that we can always grow our food locally as well? And can we have spaces for other animals to live or species so that we can cohabitate? So living closer to our planet and nature, but also living closer to each other. Can we have neighborhoods that are safe and connected, in which everyone can have a house and live in new ways, and also like a cooperative house? Can we have other types of jobs and not work 5 or 6 or 7 days a week, but maybe have time to repair our products when they break, or think about growing some food together with our neighbors? Can we have other types of transportation because things are closer? Can we use bikes more? And can we get together and have more agency over the public land, such as what is now roads or parking lots? It is also very important, also in line with the circular economy that we'll talk about more, is that we connect to the resources we use. Can we build our buildings for a longer period in time so that we don't have to demolish them? Can we think about that if we have to take them apart, can we reuse these materials? Or can we use other materials to build our buildings instead of concrete, which is having a large impact on the planet? Use other materials like wood. Can we capture water on our roofs? And can we live closer to the food that we eat? And can we use less energy? And the energy that we use, can we get that out of renewable resources? So I'd like to ask, before we go into how do we get there, are there any things that we can share from the chat that the crowd has shared on how they would see the future of the city? So let's pause. So one of the comments here that is very much in line with the circular future is that it should be used, that all the waste that I produce can be reused by me or someone else. Yeah, that's a great comment. Another comment is we should focus on using more natural materials to build cities. Yeah, like wood, for example, and that can also be reused. These are great examples. But I want to hear more from you. So let's keep that conversation going, and always feel free to reach out to us, because we want to collectively build that future and then think about, and that's what we'll go into now, how do we get there? So this is a picture of the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte. As you might see, I'm calling in from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So he's our Prime Minister, and this is a picture of him at the UN Climate Change Conference last November. And what he said is that this is the decade of action. We know that we need to get to the Paris Agreement, stick to the 2 degrees Celsius, and we need to act now. So this is good news. At least everybody recognizes that we need to do something different. What we also heard a lot is that we have to do whatever it takes. So what's the what? So let's dive into that now, because that's what Metabolic focuses on. It's the organization that I work with. We are an ecosystem of organizations. So we work with governments and businesses and NGOs and academia to drive global systems change. And our mission is to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable state. And we are doing that with over 90 humans from all over the world. So we have lots of representation in our team. And we don't only advise with a consultancy, we also do lots of research on what that would look like with our institute. We build software tools to accelerate the transition. We have a foundation that is doing amazing work on Aruba in actually implementing solutions. And then we have a ventures arm, because when there's good ideas, we want to make sure that we can build the businesses and interventions that can support that. So one way of moving to a more sustainable state with the global economy is by going from a linear economy, like we saw in the beginning, take, make, waste, to a circular economy, beyond zero waste. And when we think about a circular economy, the first thing that comes to mind is materials, right? We can't waste any materials, but we have to think about a more holistic view, because we don't want to keep using materials that, for example, are toxic. So we look at that holistically. So we want to make sure that materials in the economy are cycled at the highest value, that all the all the energy that we used is built on renewable resources, that we extract water at a sustainable rate so that we keep having water, that we support biodiversity so that we make sure that all the ecosystems can thrive, and that human society and culture is preserved. And then also, of course, we want to live healthy in cities and also outside of cities. and that we think about value in other terms of just financial. So think about, instead of money, think about time, or spending time with your family, or having new knowledge, or making something beautiful. So we need to think about other types of value than money. So now I would like to talk a little bit about that action, like how can we do that? And I wanted to show some of the examples of our work with Metabolic. So bottom-up experimentation, working with other cities, so doing stuff ourselves, working with other cities, but also how do we scale our work up? Because there's lots of cities in the world, and we need to, address all of them with each other, right? So first of all, driving implementation and experimentation from the bottom up. So this is in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. This is an old shipping yard based in the north of Amsterdam. And this is how Metabolic started 10 years ago. The municipality had this land and it was very polluted. It used to be an old shipyard and the soil was very dirty, so people couldn't really live there. So what we had set out to do was to build a very sustainable working environment here with other partners. So we wanted to show what the circular economy could look like in practice within a city. So now, 7-8 years later, it looks like this, and I'll show you a couple more examples of what we did there. So first of all, we reused old houseboats. So in Amsterdam, we have lots of these houseboats floating on water, and then when people, when they break or people are moving, sometimes they want to get rid of them. So we used these old houseboats and bought them for very little money, and then remodeled them and put them on land, so to function as places where small organizations could work. We, of course, what I was saying is that soil, right? Soil was very polluted. So what we did with the houseboats, that we connected them with a boardwalk, so that instead of walking on polluted soil, you could then walk from boat to boat using the boardwalk. Underneath, we planted plants that are actually cleaning the soil, because one of the things that we came up with is that we wanted to leave the space cleaner than that we got it. So we have plants there that are actually cleaning the soil, which is amazing. Then we wanted to experiment with high and low tech interventions, because the circular economy doesn't mean that it is very high tech innovation. Sometimes you can use plants to filter your water, for example. It doesn't need to be something very technical. But we also have high tech interventions, such as solar panels that are connected through a smart grid, so that these different houseboats can actually exchange energy. And we have an aquaponics greenhouse. So here on the left, you see one of these old houseboats. This is actually sawed through the middle because it was too big. So we put two halves and one on top of it. And that's where that aquaponics greenhouse is. Aquaponics is a really cool system in which you have a closed loop. So you have fish, and then the fish poop, the nutrients actually are used to grow plants. And these plants are then used in a restaurant that is on site. So what we're trying to pilot here is how we can feed neighborhoods, from within the city, without having to use these big monocultures that we saw in the beginning of the presentation. So this is really a pilot to see how we can effectively produce local food. And this is what it looks like. So I was talking about these boats being connected through a smart grid. You see that all the boats have solar panels, and that once one boat uses more than the other, they can actually exchange that. And on the left top, you see the restaurant. And this is a place where lots of people come every year, making it a very nice place to actually showcase what a circular economy is, because it's nice to see things in practice. Another nice thing that happened there is that it really became a catalyst for the neighborhood. So the north of Amsterdam is a post-industrial neighborhood. So there used to be lots of factories there. And what the Keuvel has next door right now is the most resilient floating neighborhood of Europe. So these are basically a Keuvel plus. So these boats are houses from people, and they're also connected through smart grid, and they are very sustainably built. So if you ever visit Amsterdam, please do reach out, and we'll show you around. So just some takeaways, because I wanted to share some insights with you that we got over the years. So one is that if we want to implement a circular economy or a more sustainable future, it's very important to share knowledge and create a tangible narrative by grounding a project in physical space, right? So really implementing something. It is important to use that experience. So what we saw with the Keuvel is that there's lots of rules and regulations in cities and not everything is allowed. So if you try to do something like this that doesn't really fit the normal urban development, you run into a lot of rules and regulations, and also how to navigate them. So how to make sure you don't, you learn how to deal with them. So experimentation, it helps really test new technologies, and that doesn't always have to be high tech, like I said. So if we test these technologies, then we can use them afterwards and scale them up. And a living lab can be a catalyst for the surrounding environment. So if you have one place in the city, you might see that around it, other initiatives will start popping up. So this is really exciting. So this is implementation. And the Keuvel, the future steps for that is that we are thinking very hard with the partners on how to keep this place in the city so that we can keep using it as a place for gathering and showcasing what the circular economy and a sustainable future might look like. Now, so this is implementation. We also work with other cities to drive action and to share some of our learnings. And we work with cities across the world, not always on the citywide level, but we give advice on buildings. How do you build a sustainable building? We also work with municipalities and architects and developers to think about neighborhoods. How should we organize a neighborhood to be as sustainable as possible? And then also looking at cities and sometimes even city networks. So we do that all over the world. And we use a systemic approach because we really want to understand what the city looks like right now, then set a vision together, like the vision that we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. And then we know where we are, where we want to go, and then we can think about how do we get there? What types of interventions or technology or initiatives can we develop together to help get to our sustainable state? And then there's, of course, implementation. And we want to monitor, we want to set goals and make sure that we keep track of if we are actually achieving our vision for the future. So this is the approach we usually take in our projects with cities. Now, why is the systems approach important? Because cities are very complex. So if we really take time to understand where a city is now, this can help us give new insight on why certain problems happen and why some of these negative impacts are at stake. It can also help us where we need to start with intervening, right? So which interventions can help us achieve our vision fastest and most effectively? And we want to avoid burden shifting, right? So, and provide insight in the trade-off. So with that, I mean, like if you have these 7 pillars that we talked through, we don't want to use a material that is toxic to our health, for example. Now I would like to take you to Poland. So Poland is in the east of Europe, and there's a city in there called Krakow. And as part of a bigger program with 3 cities in Poland, we worked for a year to help them build a circular economy strategy to ultimately achieve a sustainable future. So we co-created these strategies with these 3 cities, and we worked with local partners to build driving groups. And I'll explain to you what a driving group is in a bit, and activate local knowledge networks. So taking existing programs and initiatives as a point of departure. So we talked about that process, right? So we start with understanding where we are now. So who should be involved in the project? We build a driving group, and that group is going to stay with us for the remainder of the project and beyond, because these are the people that are passionate about bringing that forward in the city and can also help us understand the local context and help implement some of the interventions we together develop. So in a driving group, we want to think about which community organizations should we involve, which departments of the municipality, right? Because the municipalities often have different departments that all need to be involved. Think about parks, or think about the energy and resources department, or urban planning, or economics. We want to be strategic about who to involve in the project. Universities, there's often lots of new knowledge already in cities, so let's involve universities as well. And then industry, right? So think about the construction sector and think about how we can involve them so that they implement sustainable practices in their buildings. We also dive in what is already happening, because oftentimes in cities, there's lots of organizations doing good work, and we want to make sure that we build on the good work and help them bring that forward as well. We also want to understand what types of funding is in the city and the types of rules and regulations we're dealing with. What sectors are dominant in the city and which resource flows should we analyze? And we'll get to an example of that when we travel to Rotterdam next. Which resource flow should we analyze? So we can think about the agri-food sector, the construction sector, maybe think about the consumption sector, right? Like products and electronics. So we look at these and then we do an analysis there. We want to look on how that is distributed across the city, and then also what the natural climate and the planetary conditions are with the city at stake, right? What we saw in the beginning, where is the city actually located? What's the climate and what type of challenges or opportunities does that bring? Now, this is one of the results of the current state analysis of Krakow. So what we see here is a map of the city, and this map looks quite one-dimensional, but it has many different layers. For each of the neighborhoods, we understand what the challenges are, what type of resources are available, and also how we can use them as an opportunity. So I've highlighted 2 different neighborhoods. So one is a green oasis. That's a neighborhood typology that is more situated on the outskirts of the city in this case, and already has a lot of green space. It has a low buildup. There's not a lot of people living there, but it has a lot of biomass and a lot of place to perhaps grow local food. Another neighborhood typology that we identified was the loop closer. So these become very interesting if we start thinking about interventions, right? So loop closer, Nova Huta was this neighborhood. You see it on the right of the map. So what this showed was that was a post-industrial neighborhood. So it used to have lots of industry. So we figured that this loop closer has lots of resources that we might be able to utilize in a circular economy. So maybe that's a place for a living lab, like the Keuvel that I showed in the last couple of slides. So we think about a current state analysis so that we really understand what the city looks like and what types of initiatives are in every neighborhood that we can work with. Then we work with the driving groups to set a vision, like we talked about. So where do we want to bring the city? Because we understand where we are now. Where do we want to go? And how can we measure that? So in the case of Krakow, this meant a city with circular urban metabolism. So looking at how we can utilize resources, a connected city with an economy of creativity and innovation, looking at how we can build new knowledge clusters around universities, a sustainable, diverse, and inclusive built environment that fostered resilient communities. So thinking about how we can build these interconnected communities, but also the types of housing we want to have, right? So can we, instead of concrete, use wood? Or can we make sure that we build houses for a very long period? And then finally, a city with a healthy ecosystem for all species. So a little bit in line with the interconnectedness to the planet. So can we make sure that we don't only build cities for humans, but have enough space to integrate trees and parks and places where the other species can live? And then we want to make sure that we can measure that. So we have these KPIs, key performance indicators, that we use to measure our progress towards this vision. A couple of examples, because if we know where we want to go, we know where we are, we can start thinking about interventions, and a couple of examples of what an intervention could be. So one is a technology to recycle concrete, right? So if we take a building apart, we might be able to recycle that. Black soldier flies that can process organic waste. So if we have lots of organic waste, can we then process that and make compost out of it? Or a new recycling program. Maybe we just want to think about how we can collect the resources first. In the case of Krakow, we developed an action toolkit to drive implementation. So there's 24 actions to kickstart the circular economy in Krakow. So what we did there is we had a toolkit with proven solutions, things that we know that works. We want to include all the stakeholders, and we want to have impact on achieving the vision. So the goal here was to also use these interventions to build new partnerships in the city while getting towards action. And I'll show you an example that we did here. One of the things that came up that the city wanted to start with zero waste public institutions and schools. So starting with the municipal government and thinking about how we can limit waste there. And then also making sure that we work with schools and have education around what zero waste is. So each of the examples had a section on where to look for inspiration, and also had some examples on where to find that. And then finally, going back to the map, we also helped them figure out where to land these interventions. So we see these different colored boxes. These are aspects of the vision. So if I want to start with a city with a healthy ecosystem for all, there's a couple of places where you can start. So we really landed some of the interventions and then also showed the impact that could be made with when that would be implemented. And this approach, and I will share the slides if possible, so you can have a longer moment to look at this later on. But this approach works because a few months later, the city of Krakow had officially adopted this strategy that we built together, and they started to implement the actions. So one of the actions they implemented is on the bottom. It's a point for bulky waste, so that people can bring their big waste objects, and they're scattered, like they're distributed all over the city. So that these could be reused. The city is applying for more funding to do a big program of minimizing waste at public events. So that's like the public institutions and making sure that waste in public space is minimized. And they want a prize with this strategy. So that's very exciting because Krakow, with this, can also be an example for the rest of Poland that doesn't really have the most progressive national government. So it's important to work with cities, and then they can also be a catalyst for other places in the country. All right, so what did we learn there? So there's no one size fits all approach, sadly. There's lots of different cities in the world, but we have to take our time when we build a strategy. We need to build on local initiatives and existing policy agendas so that we make sure that a strategy is very tailored to and will achieve the goals. And then each neighborhood can contribute in a different way to the goal that we set as a city, because neighborhoods are different. And getting insight in the material flows and the amount of resources that are available requires data. So having accessible databases really helps. Taking you to Rotterdam briefly as a last example. So we want to stay involved with the cities that we work with. So we want to really bring the strategy towards implementation. And that's what we did in Rotterdam, which is the second biggest city of the Netherlands. You'll see a picture here. So in 2017, we did a big analysis like we did in Krakow for Rotterdam. And then we zoomed in on the construction sector. So this is a material flow analysis. So what you see on the left is all the materials flowing into the city. So in this, it's construction material that we need to build new buildings. And on the right side, so I hope this is actually right and not left for you, we see what is being demolished, right? So one of the, and you'll see the big triangle, one of the things that we found is a leverage point is that lots of demolition and building waste is being downcycled. So we're not using them to build buildings anymore. We're now using them to be a foundation for roads, or we actually send it to landfill. So we saw that that was an opportunity. So now, a couple of years later, we have worked with them as well on implementing business cases for circular building hubs. So a circular building hub is a place where you can store materials where they can actually wait to then be reutilized in a new building. So we have a big model, it's called the urban mining model, that we can use to see where houses are going to be constructed or buildings and where they're going to be demolished. So we use that to match materials. And then we also applied it spatially. So to understand what is the best location in a city to store the materials so that we can repurpose them most effectively. Now, towards implementation, a couple of lessons that we learn, and there's so many, I could talk about this for a very long time, but going from strategy to implementation takes time. We actually have to, it takes a bit of time, but it still means we have to do it. So we start with solutions that have a high impact and are feasible. So if we know that it has a high impact on our achieving the vision that we want to achieve, and is feasible. So there's the right kind of funding available. We have the right stakeholders at the table. Then we start doing it. And having stakeholders together can also lead to new types of finance mechanisms and business models, because we're doing something new, right? So sometimes when you have interventions, they actually require a very new approach. Finally, so we talked about what we have implemented ourselves at Metabolic. We also talked about how we advise other cities, but there's a lot of cities in the world. So scaling up action through sharing insights, new ideas, and tools. So this is very briefly. We work with multiple cities at the same time. So this is through our institute. We combine cities to then collectively build strategy. So this is a project that is called Reflow. It is also building a tool, and it's a collaboration. It's funded by the EU. It's Berlin, Amsterdam, Milan, Vele, Cluj, and Paris. And they're very much focusing on one resource flow and then coming up with interventions. So bundling cities and having them learn from each other is something that we see works. Another thing that is very close to our hearts is building as many open source tools and knowledge as possible. So one of the things we're building right now is the Circular City Actions Framework, together with our partners, Equally Circular Economy and EMF. And what we're doing there is we're trying to build an automated software tool so that every city can do a current state analysis and build a strategy. So that, this could be a municipal government doing that. It could also be a local partner or local organization doing that. And then we're also building a tool, the Circular Action Planner tool, that helps us see what new ideas there already are living in the city that can help us achieve this vision that we have. Then we spend time building capacity and communities of practice. So this is also part of that implementation phase. Sometimes we need to spread the word. So we spend quite some time giving workshops and making sure that the circular economy and what a sustainable future is lands in different companies, but also at schools and with other organizations. And then finally, we share ideas and we want to have conversations so that we can keep inspiring each other. So one of the things that my colleagues worked on is thinking about how we can get to a circular energy transition, which is a report I would highly recommend. And then I wanted to end with the interconnected city. So that's something that we discussed in the beginning of this talk. How do we want to live in cities? And I would like to invite you to keep sharing your ideas with us, because we need to build the urban future together. Thank you. And I see that there's lots of questions actually in the chat, so that's very exciting. I wonder, Georgia, can I just pick some, or will you pick some? Oh, I see them here. So I think I'll just go through some of these questions. It would be so much fun to actually have the conversation with you. So one, I see a question pop up. What's the single most important point to take care of in developing a circular city? Well, that's that's a great question. So that depends on the city, I guess. So one of the things that we try to figure out when we do one of these current state analysis, right? Like mapping the resources, looking at the organizations and looking at what issues are most pressing. We try to identify exactly this. Where do we start? What is the most important point to take care of in developing a circular city? But if you want to have some rule of thumb, you can always have these 7 pillars of the circular economy, because those give good guidance, right? Like we want to limit, we want to use our materials to highest value. We want to use as little as possible energy. Like prevention, I think, is probably one of the things we want to always to use less, use as little as possible, and don't waste. I think these are good rules of thumb. But then also think about the environment and the planet, and let's keep things livable. But yeah, it's a great question. I think it really differs per city. So figuring out where to start. What aspect of the circular city are you most passionate about? So another great question, because I'm passionate about quite some of it. I think for me, what is most important right now, especially, I'm sure you've all been in lockdown as well over the last 2 years, or in and out of lockdown, I am really passionate on bringing nature back in cities, or kind of not having the boundary city and nature anymore, but having much more space for that. I live in Amsterdam, and especially now in winter, it's a very gray city. We have plans for making more space for trees and parks and other species, or community gardens. But there's also a big pressure from the housing point of view. There's also this need to house more people. So for me, it's very important that we bring back nature into our cities, because that can help us with lots of our challenges. It can capture water, it can help our air be clean, and generally having more green space makes us happier. So for me, that would be my most passionate point: making cities for all species. A lot of cities in Europe have very old infrastructure. We have to preserve historical sites, even if they're not sustainable. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think about this a lot. Also, like walking through Amsterdam, because we have lots of these canal houses, and it's quite difficult because, if we think about that sustainable future, and not using a lot of energy, for example, reducing the amount of energy we use, that means isolating. Um, these houses, are making sure that they are net that they don't use or don't emit carbon, and that for some of these older buildings is not really possible. But then we can also think about those different neighborhoods, right? So maybe one neighborhood can produce more energy so that the other neighborhood doesn't have to produce as much, because some of these canal houses might not be able to carry solar panels, for example. I think that's a case by case. So we have to look at the building and then make an assessment. Can we keep it? In general, we always want to keep, like the first idea is that we want to keep the building, also because demolishing it is takes more pressure, right? Costs more energy, and also costs more materials. Um, and if that's not possible, we need to think about, maybe we can renovate, right? Maybe we can think of a different way of looking at the building. What they do sometimes is take apart the back of the building and then keep the facade, so the front, and then build another building behind it that is more sustainable. So there's lots of way of looking to it. Generally, if we look at the built environment, we want to make sure that we build buildings for the longest period of time, so that we don't have to demolish and build reconstruct. But if it's really not possible, we need to see if we can transform or do something else creative with it. Reuse the materials. Hope that answers your question. Will landfills ever disappear? Hopefully. Well, we have messed up a bit in the past, of course, and some landfills hold very toxic materials. What I've seen happen here in Amsterdam is sometimes they just wrap them up in plastic and then hope it disappears. What we can do right now is make sure that we don't use landfills anymore, so that we don't make any others. And then we probably need to start cleaning them up, and making sure that we clean the soil, right? So landfill, there's often bigger products in there. So there might be, and we talked about urban mining in terms of construction materials, but you could also see what you can get out of useful materials. When you look at the landfill, maybe there's resources we can use there and clean that up. But then still, we need to be very mindful of the toxicity that is, related to that. So hopefully, but it will take some time. Ooh, this is a great question. Which European country is the most advanced in sustainability policies? Um, hmm, there is a bunch of countries very much advanced. Some of the Nordic countries are doing very well. Um, and and I think mainly the European Union is really stepping up the game. So that's actually um, creating a lot of policy, but also funding from the European perspective. So there's lots of different programs that um, countries and cities can apply to. I would, of course, love to say the Netherlands, but that's just quite frankly not true. The Netherlands has not been doing very well. Hopefully, we step up our game very soon. Germany is doing a great job. I think there's a couple in the Nordics that are doing quite well. And then on a city basis, I think Amsterdam is doing a great job. Copenhagen is doing a great job. Tallinn is doing a great job. So So I think on the city basis, it's sometimes easier than looking at national politics. Lots of countries are not doing very well yet. All right, I think that was it. Is there anything else? No, then I think this was our session. It was really nice being here. Thank you for having me. Hopefully next time we can talk in person because it's still a bit strange to see myself on the screen while talking to others. Um, so thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in the future. And have fun with the rest of the program. Thank you.